I'll use the time on the web to start by apologizing to Jean Sikora, whom I did not introduce earlier. So my apologies. Thank you for being here. School Teams Liaison, Preferred Family Healthcare. Excellent insights. Thank you. And oversight on my part. Do we want to do any more personal stories? Is that, Dan, do you know how to start this kind of a meeting that we can make everyone talk personally?
I'm going to act like I don't.
Well, I'm going to throw something out because I've been wondering about this. Everybody said in my generation, kids were traumatized by dealing with the fear of nuclear war. Okay. Personally, I wasn't, but I understand that maybe some kids were. But it was a generational thing, that it was something that generation dealt with. And I'm wondering, you guys were talking about generational issues, and Dan, you see differences in generations. But I just wonder if people have different experiences that come maybe from generational differences.
Well, when I was in 6th grade, my teacher told me that...
Grab the mic.
When I was in 6th grade, my teacher told us that we probably wouldn't live a full life because we'd be annihilated from a nuclear war. And as I got a little older and I looked back on it, I thought, this has something to do with how I've approached life.
I mean, that's
I finally figured out he was wrong.
That falls into the 60% of traumatic experiences.
Yeah, but I mean, it stuck with me, right?
Yeah.
I'm this, old guy, and I'm still talking about it.
Right.
So obviously, I think kids today, a lot of them have fears of, am I going to have a job? Is the economy going to straighten out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak personally to that. I graduated from college 4 years ago, and when the economy was absolutely I just remember sitting and going through like interview processes and sitting in a coffee shop and just seeing the stock market plummet and kind of really worrying about, am I going to be able to find a job? And with the rising cost of education and the rising, the high unemployment rates now, college graduates are having such a hard time finding work despite being told that they're the best educated that they've had all these resources their entire life. We grew up in a time of, a boom time. We were at school, our parents told us that we could go to the best colleges and get the best jobs. And then we're coming out of college and finding that not to be true. And there's a very big issue among people my age, and I talk to my friends every day about it, is that anxiety over, you're expected, because you went to a great school, because you spent your entire life thinking about that job after college, you're expected to have it, and you don't. How do you rectify those two things?
Well, and I think you see that in, because I do have 2 high schoolers and I work in high schools all the time, you see that really trickling down and affecting high schoolers as well, because they're watching you. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, okay, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be so successful and get great grades and do all this and then pick the best school and invest in this education, and the people who are just a step ahead of me, that isn't working for them. So I'm seeing a lot of that just in my day-to-day work as well. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. But I also think
Yeah, grab the mic. Yeah. Thanks,
just
Dan.
to kind of piggyback on both comments. One, I think we have to also remember this is a generation, well, not necessarily this generation, but we have the 9/11 aftermath, right? The fear. And when we think about Syria and other countries, we're talking about nuclear issues now. And so not that they are told in as clear terms as you were, hopefully not. But I do think they're living in that atmosphere of fear. And then also to connect in a way to what you were saying, in the psychology world, we talk about emerging adulthood, this idea that we prolonged adolescence, possibly to 24, possibly even later in the 20s. And so there's something that's happening, even though we're holding kids to these expectations, whether explicitly or not, they're feeling it. We've, in a way, kind of prolonged people's debut into being a full-fledged adult. And how do those things contradict?
I think listening to all this really reminds me.
Yeah, you're good.
You're good. I'm good. But this generation had this problem. This generation had this problem. I'm pretty sure like the 14th century had their own generational problems of fear and anxiety. I think that this is honestly just, an aspect of the human condition, that mental health concerns are normative human concerns, and that the issue is we need to start having conversations to allow people to realize this is normative behavior. Concerns over your mental health are something that everyone deals with. Each generation has its own unique challenges. Every family has unique challenges. And rather than making it something that is kind of outside of our locus of control, but rather that this is something that everyone at this table here has had moments where they've been anxious or scared or they've been insecure, and how did they work past that process, and how do we teach those skills, because these are life skills. This isn't like, these are human skills.
Right.
You know, this is not something that is outside of ourselves.
I'm just curious. Yeah, go ahead.
There's something that's really key, and it's really important. Actually, some of the experiences we have are not normal human experiences. They're only normal the last 20 or 30 years. So if you look at our biology, we have a million-year-old biology, and our stress response and our coping responses are really geared around much more primal situations. Things are very different now. When you think about it, things that we used to react to, you either fought or you fled. Most of the problems that we face in our day-to-day life, you cannot fight or fly from.
Especially if you're a child.
Especially if you're a child, they don't have as much control over them. And other things that have changed, our bodies haven't changed, but culturally, socially, we're changing at an exponential rate.
Yeah.
One of the biggest differences that we see, Jim, when you talk about the nuclear crisis, we all remember what it was like. What's so different now, is the level of exposure we have to the threats and traumas. You cannot get away. Our kids are on phones, they're on the internet, they're on the TV, they're bombarded with images and messages, and those messages are twofold. Our kids get messages of two kinds that that tear them up. One is that everybody else is rich and successful and has a wonderful life. Right? So happiness is not a constant fixed state. Happiness is relative. And when they do happiness studies, what they find is that if you are in a better place than the people around you, you're happier and you feel good about yourself. So if you're making $100,000 and the people around you are making 50, you feel really good about yourself. But if you're making $100,000 and everybody around you is making $1 million, you feel inadequate and you don't feel as good.
Wait a second. Where are these children that are making $100,000?
On TV and on the internet and on their phones. The other side of this.
Startups, they're doing IT
Oh,
startups.
right.
There's a kid on the internet that made $1 million in stocks. I get that ad all the time. The other side of this is the level of trauma and fear. So kids also, the world is super scary. The world is much scarier than it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we would go outside and we would play. We'd be gone all day. We might check in at lunch. We'd come in when it was dark, right?
Yeah.
Now parents, because I've seen this with my daughter. So you hear about a kid that got kidnapped, the young ladies that were kidnapped and held in Cleveland. Now this has been going on forever. These aren't new things, but the level of attention. So I have my 9-year-old daughter looking at me with eyes like, this happens? And so they're so much more aware of the bad things because they're saturated with it. So we've got this duality of flooded with all the success and the wonderment of life that you may or may not be a part of, and most of us aren't a part of that high level of financial success.
This might seem silly, and tell me if it is, but it seems to me that one of the things in medicine now is that we're protecting children from exposure to bacteria and germs that they need to have some resistance. I wonder if we're doing the same thing with coping mechanisms by protecting kids so much, exposing them limited exposure to real life experiences, and then they can't deal with it.
Well, I can remember back when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. It's the first time I ever saw anything bad on a mass level, because everybody's we're watching the TV show because there's a teacher on it.
Yeah.
I remember that being in middle
Me too.
school, and you didn't see before. That was the first time I remember seeing something because we all wanted to watch it. And that experience, I would say, shaped my generation in some ways. But I think that a lot of times we're reacting out of fear because we don't know what's next. And it's kind of like when my daughter had a girlfriend over and they said, well, how come she didn't know about what happened in Boston? And I said, well, I wasn't really ready to talk to her about it. Well, I watched the news, she had all this information, and I had to be at a good place to be able to talk about it that would be safe for both of us.
Well, that's, I think, a key thing, when Bart and I were just talking back there during some of the other interviews about some of the visuals from Oklahoma. And I was saying to him that I was watching, teachers carrying children out of the school, and I said, I'm 52 years old and I never want to go in an elementary school again as long as I live, was my first response, and if I don't, as an adult professional social worker who works in the mental health field, know exactly how to handle that situation, I'm being bombarded with that media, how then am I supposed to help my own children or other kids deal with that as well? So I think we have an expectation sometimes on the adults around us as well, that we just have an inherent coping mechanism.
And on that note, we've run out of stream time on the web. So that we'll leave it with a question and kind of back where we started the night on that topic. Thanks, guys, for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Good job, everybody. Thanks for watching.